introduction. It's great to see everyone here today. We have an absolutely gorgeous day. It couldn't be nicer. And I hope that you're able to enjoy the gardens when we come back. So we'll have a beautiful interlude, and then you have maps and go outside and enjoy yourselves. I wanted to thank Teresa again, and for the Montclair State, the Alumni Association, and the Office of Annual Giving, because it really was a true collaboration of many different heads, Italian speaking, English speaking, whatever. So thank you again. If we could advance the next slide, please. So here we are. We're at the Montclair to Montechiaro, and we decided on this topic, or this title, because Montclair really is Montechiaro, the clear mountain. One of the outstanding features of Montclair is the fact that it was settled along the ridge, and that this is the view from that ridge, which we'll be visiting in a little bit. And with that campanelli in the background, you can always think that you envision that you're in Florence or one of the hills in Fiesole. So I just want to know that we're going to be going back and forth to Italy. We're going to be in contemporary Italy. We're going to be in ancient Italy, and then we're going to be in contemporary Montclair, so that we can look at these various elements and aspects that really have come out of the Italian heritage and architectural heritage. The residents of Montclair, we recognize the Italian contribution to the world in terms of art, literature, and architecture. It's known that many masterpieces of Western civilization were created by the Italians using their innate sense of beauty and design. Today, with the help of my colleague, Frank Valetsky, we will see how this sense of Italian style is manifested itself in the architecture of Montclair. What better place to experience the essence of the Italian villa style than here at the Van Vleck House and Gardens, as you can see up on the screen. It was designed in 1916 by Joseph Van Vleck Jr. for his brother, and this home sits on a 5.2-acre piece of property bought during the 1870s by their father. The parents' home stood at the northwest corner of the property until it was demolished after the death of their mother, and this house was built. And as I sit here, or stand here, and have visited here many times, I'm often amazed or think about if anyone's been to Pompeii. And the way that this is set up is really like a Pompeian villa. You have the garden. In Pompeii, you would have had a wall across, but you would have had this open area with a water feature. And then the rooms would have opened up and into the center area. So you would get the bit of, it could be enclosed, it could be open, but you get that sense of vitality and life, which is very essential to the whole Italian experience. So, but here, standing here, Joseph Van Vleck, a partner in the architectural firm of Van Vleck and Goldsmith, was responsible for a number of buildings in Montclair. Including the current Duran School on Grove Street, formerly the Grove Street School, the Hillside School, Montclair High School, the George, which is a Georgian Inn down the block, the First Methodist Church, and the Madison Building on Bloomfield Avenue. Like many American architects, Mr. Van Vleck lived in Montclair while maintaining his office and practice in New York City. Here at the Garden, Joseph applied the architectural principles he learned at Columbia with a first-hand knowledge of original Italian villas he experienced in his travels to the continent. Learning the architectural design and principles through travel to Italy and the rest of Europe was de rigueur for architects and artists. Similar to the Grand Tour, which 18th and 19th century Europeans embarked upon as the final stage of their education, it provided actual witness to the built environment to experience scale, light, and material. The previous generation relied on books and prints for architectural inspiration, which Frank will go into more detail. But by the turn of the 20th century, American fortunes and the relatively stable political atmosphere encouraged these men to travel to Europe, to travel to Italy. Charles A. Platt, now credited for creating the concept of the Italian garden, where the house and garden are parts of a complex spatial composition, employing a geometry similar to those he experienced in Italy. Along with Edith Wharton, Platt was one of these artist-architects who traveled to Italy in 1887. Upon his return, he transformed an existing house in Montclair into an Italian villa, which we will see later. Not this house, but a house on Eagle Rock Way. But for now, let us look at Platt's words as he describes his theory of the relationship of garden to house. The evident harmony of arrangement between the house and surrounding landscape is what first strikes one in an Italian landscape architecture. Platt uses villa, which we consider this to be, in the Italian sense, implying that all farmable parts of the grounds are arranged in direct relationship to the house, and the house itself is as much a part of the composition as the garden. But how does one create harmony of a building if the site does not include extensive land on which to create a dialogue between buildings and landscape? To understand that, we need to look at individual architectural features created in Italy, and now we can see in Montclair. Some of these features date back to the Roman period, while others are medieval and then Renaissance. So in order to do that, we have to really look at what the Roman Empire was at the time. And it was really an extensive body all throughout the Mediterranean. They were the Romans were the first in Western civilization to create buildings using a codified construction system. They built buildings that symbolized the power and influence of the Roman Empire and brought this message to the ends of their domain. Between 80 BC and 15 AC, Marco Vitruvio Polio, author, architect, military, and civil engineer, which I found out that most Italians have more than one career. They're Renaissance men, multi. He was known as Vitruvius, and he wrote his thesis entitled De Architectura. As Romans had no formalized architectural theory, they looked towards the Greeks for their inspiration. These were the first texts to compare the architecture of the body with that of the building, focusing on three central themes of the building. These themes are force, firmitas, functionality, utilitas, and beauty, venusitas. Many of these theories had, as I said, Greek origins. In his texts, Vitruvius included images and proportions so that it would have been easier for architects to know how a building should look and how it should be worked. Most were large municipal and religious buildings. Many of these are still present today in Europe, Asia, and Africa, all the outposts of the Roman Empire. Next slide. Now we come to the Italian Renaissance and the architecture of the great Andrea Palladio. He wrote the 4 books of architecture. These books contain plans for the construction of villas, churches, and municipal buildings based on the Roman style. He practiced in the Veneto, and many of his villas and churches are still witnesses of his creativity. Palladio emphasized the symmetries, perspective, and values of the classical form of architecture as the temple of ancient Rome. And we can see here a plate from his book that demonstrates the different styles of columns, many of which you'll be able to see on the tour today, and I have some pictures of them later on. So here we see Andrea Palladio and his book and the type of detail that he used with floor plans and facades and that were in his 4 books. Here are the buildings that he designed and had built in the Veneto in Italy. And if we look at these, we can see what's very important is this what's called the temple front, with the pediment and the columns. So,
what's the one on the upper row?
Oh, this is in Venice. That's the Venetian.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it's San Giorgio in Venice. But you need to go. You go backwards.
Yeah.
Keep going. So now we're going to fast forward again another few hundred years, and we're going to see buildings in Montclair, the Romanesque style, which also comes from Italy. During the medieval period, these buildings were characterized by barrow vaults and semicircular arches. This is called Romanesque. At the end of the century, these arches took on a pointed shape, heralding the Gothic style. And you can see a little bit on the doorway over at Mount Carmel Church. Here are two buildings, the Church of the Mount Carmel, and notice the arches and the side barrel vaults, which are very medieval. And the other is the original Masonic Temple, which is down on South Fullerton, which is now Hair Salon. I think it's Bangs.
Bangs.
Yeah, Bangs. Notice the windows and the stones. These buildings were called the modern inspiration, which we have here in Montclair, of the Romanesque period. So I will now introduce, Frank will introduce himself, and he will take over.
Tante grazie. Tante grazie, mi fa molto piacere di essere qui a dare questa talk di Montclair. I'm very pleased to have been invited to give this presentation about the Italian origins of Montclair. I want not to take too long, however. These are engravings, and they're of Eagle Rock. And there was a person from the Crane family named Alexander Jackson Davis. His grandmother was a Crane, and also from Bloomfield, from the Joseph Davis family. The Davis farmhouse homestead is now the Bloomfield Steakhouse. But it was a very important property in Bloomfield that went down to the Morris Canal, and then there was the green that they donated to the church. They were staunch abolitionists, and Davis was very proud of his relations with Montclair. He was the son of a modest preacher in New York City, and so he never really could have a formal education in architecture. He went to work for an engraver. So his whole education in architecture and about Italy is from engravings that he was working on. Oh, and so these were actually, this one is commissioned by Llewellyn Haskell. Davis became an architect just through his own training, and is known as the father of the American Gothic architecture. But all of his origins are really in having studied the classical architecture of Italy. He and Llewellyn Haskell are responsible for getting the artist community to come to Montclair. He got Haskell to purchase the land that is now Llewellyn Park, where they envisioned doing an ideal community of like-minded artists and luminaries and abolitionists, and Llewellyn Park that starts on Llewellyn Road in Montclair, and we'll see one of the first houses. This is Davis, and this is Alexander Jackson Downing, his relative, through, they actually met at the White House. They were both relatives of President Jackson. And Downing was a wealthy New York businessman. He owned the monopoly of the ferry boat service on the Hudson River. So his idea was to develop the countryside outside of New York City into suburbs and have people go back and forth as commuters, and they could live in New Jersey in a suburb and have a beautiful property that was different than having a city house, but an American house with a garden. So he did 2 books with Davis about creating American gardens. And one was a pattern book for architecture. We'll see if you'd like to move on. Davis took Haskell to Montclair. He originally lived on the ridge along Ridge Road in Kearney in a castle designed by Davis. Unfortunately, because the Passaic River was so polluted, his wife and children unfortunately died of typhoid and cholera from the water in that area. So Llewellyn Haskell, who was New York City's most wealthy chemicals merchant, whose company then became Merck, wanted to focus on health. So they came out to Montclair where there was healthy water, and Davis designed this house for him that still exists today on Llewellyn Road. and it's called Bloomfield Villa because Montclair was called West Bloomfield at that point. And here you see